If you have a degree in philosophy, here's a question that people will ask you and expect you to have an answer. What is the meaning of life? This is the question that we will ask and answer today. But we're going to begin by doing that annoying thing that philosophers do, which is before answering the question, talk about what it means. We'll talk, that is, about the meaning of meaning. Super annoying thing to do. But I'm afraid the question requires a little bit of scrutiny. It's not totally clear what is being asked when we ask what the meaning of life is. I'm going to give you my own view about what's going on here, and we'll see what we can do with it. Think about someone on their deathbed. This may be abstract or theoretical for you, but perhaps not. Perhaps you've spoken to people who are on their deathbeds, who are near death, or who at least feel that they are. Some ask questions like these. Looking back, was it worth it? What do I value about the life I've lived? What are my regrets? Was it any good? Please tell me I'm good. People search here for affirmation, of course. They search for something of value to find in the life story they've told. This is the mood we need to be in to think about the meaning of life. And the first thing I want us to notice about that is that the kind of assessment here is holistic. Instead of looking to an episode or a snapshot of a life and asking, is that valuable? For example, was I feeling good that day? Or was this degree good? A 4, 3, 5, 10-year span, however long it was you studied? No, when we ask these questions about meaning in life, we're asking about a holistic property of a life. We've encountered this kind of question and this kind of value already. Do you remember this little diagram we looked at in perhaps week 2? Pleasure over time. So this is the story of a life. Pleasure starts low, it goes higher, goes lower, goes higher, goes lower, goes higher, then you die. We can chart out life stories using tools like this. And one thing that we observed is that it matters to us not just how much pleasure we had, but also the shape of the life story. So take these 2 life stories, and let's just suppose that the area under the curve is the same for each. So the total amount of pleasure is the same. It looks like one is better than the other. It is better to have a life that goes up rather than down over time, despite the fact that aggregate pleasure is the same across both of these lives. This points us to an interesting property that's not just reducible to or can't be explained just in terms of little bits of pleasure or even summing up little bits of pleasure. Now, we use that early in the term as an argument against hedonism, which says that intrinsic value is all about pleasurable experiences. But we can use it in another way here, just to point our attention to the fact that there's a kind of value apparently at play here that is not merely about pleasure lived in a life. It's about the shape of a life as a whole, how things went overall. So this is the second feature of meaning in life that I point your attention to, which is that it's non-summative. This is a kind of value that lives can, maybe do, have, that isn't just the area under that curve. Turn back to the dying ones among us. How many of you are dying? Every hand should go up. In fact, death is the process that terminates, dying is the process that terminates in our death. We're all dying. So, you're on your deathbed now. You too can have these thoughts, the same thoughts that this fellow has. You want a life to be meaningful? Suppose so. You want to know whether your life was indeed meaningful. And I don't think, on reflection, that this desire views meaning as a means to an end. So when we're on our deathbeds, wondering if our lives are meaningful, or in chairs in a lecture, wondering if our lives are going to be meaningful, we're not thinking of meaning as a tool to be used to achieve something else. After all, there's nothing else for this fellow to achieve. He'll be gone soon enough. So the kind of value in view here is final. It's not instrumental or a tool to be used as an instrument to get other stuff. It's valuable for its own sake. So these are some criteria or features that help us to close in on the kind of value that's in view when we ask, what is the meaning of life? More to say about this soon. Perhaps we can put our initial findings this way. When lives are meaningful, there are goods that make them meaningful. So meaning in life derives from those final goods, not merely instrumental ones, that make a life as a whole worth living, so that's the holistic piece, overall good, and choice-worthy for the one who lives it. So looking back on a life, or looking somehow in a zoomed-out perspective at the whole thing that was, that is to be, these are the kinds of goods that, when present, lead us to give affirmative answers to those questions like, was it all worth it? Better to have been? Was my life a good one? This does not yet tell us what meaning in life is. This is a functional characterization instead of the role played by these meaning-conferring goods. So this tells us what the goods, if present, do to a life. They make it meaningful. And it gives us some necessary conditions for those goods, but it doesn't tell us what those goods actually are. So here's an analogy. What is money? Well, money, in a given context, is a commonly accepted medium of exchange. Nice definition. It gives us the functional role of money, but it doesn't actually tell us what in a given situation plays that role. In a prison, it might be cigarettes. In my life, it might be Bitcoin. Elsewhere on this island, it's Singapore dollars, and so on. So we have two different ways of characterizing something. There's the functional way, which says what it does, and then there's the substantive or theoretical answer, which says what it is that does that thing. So we have the function of these meaning-conferring goods in view now. These are the goods that give life meaning. Final goods that confer that holistic property of life, and so on. But we don't yet know what they are. So we haven't yet answered the question, what is the meaning of life? We've set some parameters, however. Before we turn to a theory of what goods actually make lives meaningful, let's look at some threats to meaning. These are factors that, when present in a life or when absent, rob it of meaning. These are bad. Here's one kind of threat. Look up to the starry heavens above. Think about the cosmos as a whole, our place within it. The Earth, a tiny blue dot. And in fact, zoom out a little bit further, that dot cannot even be seen. We're small. We're insignificant. We are wildly tiny, illegible in the grand scheme of things. Imagine God looking out over all that is. He can barely see us, so to speak. Reflecting on thoughts like this can start to conjure up not just feelings of smallness, but of meaninglessness. That what we do doesn't matter. That our lives do not, after all, have any of this substantive final good to them, that they're worth living in any real sense. Many people have thought things like this. Simon Blackburn says, to a witness with the whole of space and time in its view, nothing on the human scale will have meaning. Zoom out, you can barely even see Earth, much less its inhabitants. How could they possibly be worth anything at all? When I consider thy heavens, the psalmist writes, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars. Again, zooming out and thinking from the divine perspective, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? The implied answer to the rhetorical question is, man is nothing, speck, if that. Nicholas Rescher, another philosopher, says, on the astronomical scale, we are no more than obscure inhabitants of an obscure planet. Nothing we are or do in our tiny sphere of action within the universe's vast reaches of space and time makes any substantial difference in the long run. Notice that he's also zooming out not just in the spatial dimensions, but in the temporal ones as well. We're newcomers. A cosmos 13, 14 billion years old, we've barely existed for any of that time, and we occupy the smallest little speck of that cosmos' footprint. What are we? We can turn this into an argument that our lives lack meaning. And it's not that complicated. Let's call it the big picture argument. It goes like this. At the cosmic level, nothing we do makes a substantial difference. Zoom out far enough and you can't even see us, much less see any effects of anything we do. Most of the cosmos is outside of our light cone altogether. We cannot make a difference. And if so, our lives are meaningless. So, our lives are meaningless. Is this argument any good? I actually don't think so. I'll give you some objections. Let's look at premise 2 first. This is the step from lack of a cosmic difference to meaninglessness. Let's first put my objection as a question. Could there be meaning or meaning value that is deep, satisfying, maybe even epic, but not cosmic? I think so. I see no obligation to accept as meaningful or valuable only those things that are legible at the big level, the very biggest level of all. To me, this is a kind of metaphysical megalomania, the demand that we be like gods, visible from outer space or beyond. Now, maybe that would be nice. Maybe it would be very nice to be that big and that powerful, that important to the history of the cosmos. We're not. It doesn't, I think, follow from that we're not meaningful or that our lives lack this special kind of meaning, value. So I think there's simply an illegitimate step here that asks for too much. The standards are simply too high. So the argument bakes into the cake meaninglessness by imposing these very high standards for meaning. And surprise, surprise, our lives turn out to be not meaningful by those standards. I think cosmic standards are inappropriate for non-cosmic beings like us. We need human standards, appropriate to the kind of thing we are. Let's look at premise 1. This one says that nothing we do makes a difference at the cosmic level. I think there's another kind of confusion at play as well. And let me make that argument by distinguishing between two things that might be going on here. What does it mean to make a difference at the cosmic level? Well, I think one natural reading of that is being an instrument for good or for ill that's legible at that cosmic level. Here's another thing that we might be thinking about here, though, which is just not instrumental goodness or instrumental badness, being an instrument of good or an instrument of bad in a way that's legible at the cosmic level, but instead just something being valuable in itself, or perhaps disvaluable in itself. Why should we take that first criterion in hand? Why should we be looking for difference-making at the cosmic level? Again, to me, that seems inept for creatures like us. It's simply asking too much. And in fact, the question that we're asking when we ask about the meaning of life is not about whether we are instruments of good at this zoomed-out cosmic perspective. We're asking instead about final goods realized by our lives in themselves. Of course, there's more to say here. There always is. But we'll turn to another threat to meaning. This is Sisyphus, who every day pushes the rock up the hill, and cursed by the ancient Greek gods, is doomed to watch that rock fall down and then do it again for an eternity. Life for Sisyphus sucks quite badly. It's absurd and it's repetitive. He goes through the motions. He exerts energy. He burns calories. He pushes the rock up and down it comes again. Every day the same as the last. Every day the same as the one to come. Sisyphus' life isn't just sucky. Many have thought, too, that it's also meaningless. That the absurd repetition shows that that kind of special final value realized by a life story just isn't here. This is a life that's going nowhere. Repetitive and absurd. Well, let's take a look at our own lives. Here's what some of us do. We wake up. We get to the MRT or the bus stop. We climb aboard. Then we do various busy work. We fill out worksheets. We remember things. We regurgitate them on other worksheets. Then we go home. We scroll. We fall asleep. And do you know what happens the next day? We get up. We go to the MRT. We take the bus. We fill out more worksheets. We go to bed. We scroll for a while. And so on. Do you feel it? Is this life all that different from Sisyphus's? Is it like his, repetitive and absurd? Some say that when you die, you're reincarnated as some other being. You suffer, you die, you're reincarnated as another being altogether. The cycle of samsara. What the images I've shown you about our own lives suggest that samsara is not this grand cycle occurring across lives. We're stuck in samsara in the lives as we live them. Little cycles that repeat over and over again, even within a life. The argument for absurdity is not far from hand. Here's how it goes. Our lives are relevantly analogous to that of Sisyphus. Repetitive, absurd, and if so, then they're meaningless. Therefore, they're meaningless. You feel it? Seems like some of you do. Good. This argument, too, in my view, is objectionable, but maybe less objectionable than the cosmic one. Perhaps we can begin thinking about it by distinguishing absolute repetition versus, let's call, patterned similarity. So absolute repetition is when the same day literally is lived again and again and again. Sisyphus' life is like this. Are our lives really like that? Well, if you look at them from a low resolution enough perspective where you can't really see the details, they can start to look that way. Where you get up, you do stuff, then you go to sleep, then you get up, then you do stuff, then you go to sleep. But look a little bit closer. Get a little bit higher resolution view in the life, and you'll still see patterns of similarity, yes, from day to day, from week to week, from year to year. But there'll also be change. That looks important. And in fact, if the change is progressing towards something, it looks very different from Sisyphus' life. So for example, if across those 13 weeks of getting up, going to the MRT, going to school, filling out forms, scrolling in bed, 13 weeks of that shit, but then you're done with a semester, and you're 1/8 of the way closer to earning a degree. That is different than Sisyphus' life. Sisyphus, I'm afraid, earns no degrees. In fact, in the classical story, he doesn't even get more buff. He starts buff, he ends buff, but every day is the same. So if our lives have any progress at all towards any goals, they appear to be different than Sisyphus's. Now here's a caveat. For this to be a relevant disanalogy that shows that our lives are, by contrast to Sisyphus's, possibly meaningful, not absurd, it can't just be that they change over time or that they progress. They have to progress towards something that's actually worthwhile. So consider Sisyphus, but ever more buff. So this is a modification of the classic story where every day he pushes up a bigger boulder, and every day he gets stronger. And every day following, he pushes up an even bigger boulder. but it does still literally go on for an eternity. This is a life story with progress, but it's not progress towards any worthwhile goal. So if we want this response to work to show that our lives are meaningful, they need to progress towards something that's ultimately valuable. Consider someone who every day goes to the money changer and trades Singapore dollars for Bitcoins, Bitcoins for US dollars for IDR, IDR for ringgit, and so on. Round and round he goes, this parable of the money changer. But all he ever does is trade money for money. Something's wrong here. Money, when used properly, is only an instrumental good. The point of money is to get rid of it, not for more money, as the money changer does, but rather to get rid of it for something that's not money. Money is for spending. So also, other instrumental goods that we gather along the way in life are for acquiring final goods, things that are worthwhile in themselves, not mere instruments or tools. So if all we're doing is getting more buff, so to speak, that is acquiring more instrumental goods, more money, for example, but not actually spending it or using it for something that's more ultimately valuable, well, we haven't escaped an analogy or a relevant point of analogy between our lives and that of Sisyphus. Questions remain. Well, what is the meaning of life, after all? And perhaps we could distinguish the meaning of life, which is a very abstract question about lives in general, to just what is the meaning of our lives? Or better still, what in a life that is meaningful provides meaning in that life? So this is the distinction between meaning of life and meaning in a life. And we'll think more about this in the time that remains. We'll be asking not about the meaning of life in that full abstract mode, but instead about meaning in life. And notice that we might be able to defeat somehow these toxic threats to meaning, the cosmic perspective, the Sisyphusian analogy. But to really do the job, to give us any optimism here, we'll need to identify the goods that make life meaningful and then hope to find them in our own lives. And that is a more significant task. It's a bit harder. Well, let's start thinking about what goods actually confer meaning in a life. And we'll use Susan Wolf's thinking here to help us. She provides what I'll call a hybrid theory of meaning in life. To see what it's a hybrid of, it'll be helpful to identify two bad theories of meaning in life. Here's one. Meaning in life just consists in pleasure in that life. The more pleasure, the more meaning. It's a simple theory. It has all the advantages of hedonism, a theory about intrinsic value that we've observed already. But it has significant costs, too. To see these costs, let's consider a case study of basically any rich, pampered person ever. Here is what rich, pampered people tell us about their lives, which have been spent in pursuit, successfully, of enormous quantities and degrees and kinds of pleasure. They report this: pleasure is empty. You can come 1,000 times and you're not happy at the end of it. You can have 1,000 gourmet meals. You can go on 100 yacht voyages, but it does not satisfy. Now, you may say to someone who gives this little speech, well, I'd like to try for myself, just to be sure. Fair point. Nonetheless, this is what rich, pampered people report to us. Waves of pleasure do not make them happy. Here's one underlying psychological factor: hedonic adaptation. Human beings, our perceptual systems, respond not to amplitude, but to change. And in fact, when we get used to, or when we're accustomed to some level of pleasure, we cannot feel it anymore. The amplitude is nothing to us. What we need is change. That requires escalation. And our systems are finite in how much pleasure they can handle. This is a total buzzkill, literally. People who live lives in pursuit of pleasure also report this: they are not free. They are slaves to their own desires. Slavery sucks. And when looking back on these lives as a whole, these pampered individuals report that they were not worth living, despite being filled with such pleasure. Again, fair enough for you to reply with a little skepticism. I'd like to take one of those voyages. I'd like to have a few yachts, and I'll report back to you. Nonetheless, I say, wise people across space and time have nonetheless reported this. This is Koheleth, author of Ecclesiastes, or one of the voices in the book of Ecclesiastes, the Hebrew Bible. I said in mine heart, go to now. I will prove thee with mirth, thereby enjoy pleasure. And he tests various kinds of pleasures and riches and luxuries and joys. And the report is always this: vanity, vanity, all is vanity. It's empty. Even Don Draper in Mad Men says this: what is happiness? It's a moment before you need more happiness. We adapt, and we can no longer even feel the happiness we have. We need more. It simply doesn't satisfy. Now, nonetheless, pleasure is very nice. So we should, even if we reject a pure pleasure-based theory of the meaning of life, or meaning in life, we should still keep in mind that pleasure is very good. Here's another kind of theory, another kind of simple but mistaken theory. There's feeling good and then there's doing good. Perhaps we could identify meaningful lives as just those in which one does a lot of good. After all, it's good to do good. And this is one of the things that you might want when you look back across your life on your deathbed, to have done lots of good. Here's some problems for this view. The first is that feelings matter. The hedonist is not wrong about this, that pleasure is good, and that having pleasure in life does make that life better. And it kind of sucks if your life consisted in being a do-gooder and you didn't enjoy it. What a terrible life to live, in fact, despite the goodness realized in it. It can also be boring. So it looks like goodness in life doesn't suffice for that life being good for the one who lives it. Of course, it can make it good in some sense, but is it choice-worthy? Is it choice-worthy from the perspective of the one who lives it? Pleasure has this nice benefit of being obviously choice-worthy. We choose pleasure. We like it. We want it. A life with goodness without pleasure, it's unclear whether it has that important property, though. Let's look at a case study. This is the greatest Christmas movie of all time. It's a Wonderful Life. This is George, the protagonist. George wants to see the world. He buys a suitcase here. He's planning to travel to Europe and beyond. But on the eve of falling in love with his eventual wife, his father has a stroke, and he's called into the office. And instead of doing what he wants to do, takes a seat at the board of the building and loan. And time and again, does the right thing. George is a do-gooder. In a bank run, he's there. The town can count on him. And he uses the money from his own honeymoon to keep the building and loan solvent. George is a do-gooder. He faces a low point in life, however, because all the good he's done isn't apparent to him. It was good without pleasure, and he's led to thoughts of suicide. And the bad guy, Mr. Potter, here, tells George, you're worth more dead than alive, because his life insurance policy outweighs any other asset he's got on hand. Now, George has lived a fine life in terms of doing good, but it still, from his perspective, kind of sucks. It's missing something. It's missing joy. By the way, his name isn't just George, it's George Bailey. I've watched this movie 35 times so far in my life, because I've seen it every Christmas since I was 5. The Baileys enjoy this movie. We'll hear more about it in just a bit. But the point is, doing good without feeling good is also empty. Susan Wolf starts to use considerations like this to develop her own view about meaning in life. And it consists in a special kind of good and a special kind of enjoyment of that good. So let's take a look at what she says. Some projects are worthwhile, but too boring or mechanical to be sources of meaning. People do not get meaning from recycling or from writing checks to Oxfam and the ACLU. Other acts and activities, though highly pleasurable and deeply involving, like riding a roller coaster or meeting a movie star, do not contribute to meaning. So she's pointing out these two kinds of mistakes, a life of only pleasure or a life of just do-gooding without enjoyment. It's boring, it's empty, it's not enough for a life of real meaning. So in response, she develops a hybrid theory. We have to combine these factors somehow. Not just pleasure, not just good. And in fact, not just pleasure and good. Wolf's view is that pleasure and the good have to be related in the right way. Pleasure in the good. Sometimes when I leave the house, my wife will tell me, be good. And sometimes she'll say, have fun. And then sometimes, and she's expressing a Wolf view when she says this, have fun being good. That's the view, in view here. Meaning in life is not found in having fun only or being good only. It's having fun being good. Now, Wolf does have specific kinds of pleasures in mind here and specific kinds of goods or life projects to pursue. So let's take a look at that. In a world in which some things are more worthwhile than others, meaning arises when a subject discovers or develops an affinity for one or typically several of the more worthwhile things, and makes use of the opportunity to engage with it or them in a positive way. The projects, the goods, the good things done in a life have to be worthwhile. So Wolf concedes that her theory requires objective value. It's not enough that someone regards them as being good, or feels that they're good, or wants them to be good. They must, in fact, be objectively good. These life projects that, when actively engaged, confer meaning. And note, too, that this screens off some kinds of life projects, those that are ultimately for the bad. So if your life project is to exterminate Jews, no good, no good. Even if you like it, even if you want it, even if you think it's nice, subjective feelings aside, no good. This is my philosophy of Hitler, by the way. He's very bad. And it screens out also life projects that are pointless. Even if you feel like it, you don't get meaning in your life by engaging in the project of counting all the blades of grass, because that is not objectively a worthwhile or meaningful or actually valuable pursuit. Some of you don't like objective value. Here's a thought. If you don't like objective value or think there is no such thing, you should probably think that there's no such thing as meaning in life either. In fact, this is Wolf's view, that to ask the question about meaning in life is to ask about things that go beyond mere subjective responses. She might be right about that, she might be wrong, but let's just note that that is one of the assumptions she's making here. Let's notice a couple things about the vocabulary that she uses. So we're thinking about not just the life projects with which one's engaged, but the engagement of them. She uses things like active engagement, where the subject has an affinity for the life projects. So this is not just passive, letting things happen to you. It's doing things, raising children, building institutions, making great art, making not great art, but still okay art. It also excludes boredom. The kind of engagement in view here is interested. It's focused. There's a kind of joy in focus that Wolff thinks helps confer meaning. And this kind of activity also rules out some kinds of disaffect. If you're actively engaged in something in this way, not only are you not bored, but you don't hate it either. What does this actually look like? Here's her slogan. Meaning arises when subjective attraction, that's the feelings, pleasure part, meets objective attractiveness, that's the good part. So when they're married in the right sort of way, when they've met up, that's meaning in life. I wonder what kinds of images of life come to your mind here. So think for a second about these big picture, holistic questions about meaning in life and the kinds of lives that you think are meaningful. Think of some examples and share them with the class. It's one page. LKY is an interesting example. I knew somebody would say that. LeBron's an interesting example. Now, I'm more of a Michael Jordan guy myself, but that's because I was born in the 80s. The true GOAT. Do you think LeBron James enjoys playing basketball? Yes. This is one reason people respond to him in the way that they do. He's also engaged in a meaningful or worthwhile project, entertaining others. He's an instrument of great good in the world. So I can see why you might think that's not just a pleasurable or nice life, it's in fact meaningful. This has all been abstract. This has all been theory. I'm going to see if we can do something more than theory, though, in the time that we have left. Human beings have three aspects. Head, heart, hands. There's what we think, what we feel, what we do. Questions about meaning in life, what it all means, zooming out in the way that we've done, require engagement of all three of these aspects of the human person. The way to do all of this, and I've told you this before, is not to be clever. What we need here, the prize, the thing that will help us navigate these waters well, it's not cleverness, it's wisdom. And there is one and only one way to become wise. Do you remember what it is? Suffering. So that's the bad news. What we need to build meaning in life, especially in practical ways, is not just theory, it's not just cleverness, it's wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to properly apply principles to the cases at hand. Not just to know, meaning in life is found from having these projects that we're actively engaged with, pleasure in the good. Wisdom would be not just knowing that, but knowing which projects you should engage in. Applying the principle. Now, this is hard won when won at all. In fact, there are three barriers to becoming wise. First, you have to suffer. Those who don't suffer don't become wise. Second, you have to survive the suffering. Not all those who suffer survive. And then third, you have to learn from it. You have to reflect on suffering and grow in some ways. Without that, you cannot find the wisdom required to navigate life well. You can't. But let's suppose that we had even just a small modicum of wisdom. Let's hope that we can find it through future suffering. And let's think about practical elements of meaning in life. I'll put it this way. We'll think about making meaning. I want to distinguish a bad and a better reading of making meaning. By making meaning, I don't mean that we're just going to decide that something is meaningful and make it so. I don't think we can do that. I don't think subjective feelings or thoughts or attitudes or stances alone can make a life project meaningful. What we can do, however, is discover what's meaningful, that is, discover the available worthwhile projects or pursuits, and we can choose to bend our own lives towards them. So that's what I say, that's what I mean when I say making meaning. Here are 4 mistakes, and I'm abstracting up from what we've already seen in theory. 4 mistakes one might make when making meaning. Fixation on the cosmic. My own suspicion is that this is a kind of self-worship. That if we expect too much, if we ask for cosmic meaning befitting a demigod or a god, well, we won't find it. And we've made a mistake in asking for it in the first place. It's simply not apt for finite creatures like us. This one will cut closer to home. Another mistake we can make is repetitive pursuit of merely instrumental goods. I've spent a lot of time with college and university alumni, and many of them report to me that they've spent a lot of their time making more money. And then they grow in their career and they get an upgrade so they can make more money. And then they negotiate for a raise and get more money. And after a bit of this, it's kind of unclear to them what it's all for. They've made a mistake of pursuing only instrumental goods. But the whole point of money is to spend it. The whole point of other instrumental goods is to trade them for final goods, to exercise them, to use them as tools. Please don't make that mistake. Of course, you will. But maybe you'll make it a little bit less, since I told you that. Another mistake is pursuing pleasure alone. Again, pleasure is nice. I want more of it, so do you. But pleasure alone is empty. Pleasure is best. Pleasure confers meaning when it's pleasure in the good. Goodness alone also is a mistake. It is a total drag to do what you think is right, but to hate doing it. It is an absolute drag. Terrible, terrible life choice. Gritting your teeth is no way to live. So these are the mistakes. Nonetheless, you may ask, how? What do we actually do? What steps can we take to build or make meaningful lives? I'll share with you a few. Take these as tentative steps in the right direction that will require wisdom for you to apply them to your own life. So 4 pro tips for making meaning. The first sounds like just restating the problem, but it's not. I'll tell you why. The first is to make value. To find ways to add value to the world that is not there already. One sign that we've done this well is when others respond, when they value what it is we've made. Now, you have many skills, and you'll have more. You will grow in power, in stature, and skill. And you can think of these as a Venn diagram. So perhaps you have one skill in economics, perhaps another in computer science. Now, it is one thing, one path towards trying to create value for the world is just to try to get really good at economics. Do you know how hard that is? Do you know how hard it is to create novel value when your Venn diagram is that big? It is very hard. But let's say that you're looking at the intersection between economics and computer science. Not trying to be the best computer scientist or the best economist, but someone who's doing something novel or unique or valuable at their intersection. All of a sudden, the field that you're competing against just got smaller. You now have a way to add novel value to the world and fewer people to compete against. Now notice I'm giving advice about building meaning in life. I'm also giving job advice. This is how to make money, in fact. You add value to the world in ways that other people will value, and you do it uniquely. You add value in ways that someone else isn't already doing. And it's easier to do that when you focus on these intersections of the Venn diagram. Here, by the way, is a very general skill that you can always add to any talent stack or any Venn diagram, which is communication. If you can think, read, write, speak clearly in public without umming and ahhing your way through it, you will set yourself apart and find a way to add value that few others are valuing, because few others take the time to press on that intersection. What will the Venn diagram look like for you? That will take wisdom to understand. But this is a tool I submit for your consideration for finding a way to build value in the world, to do it uniquely, and, by the way, to make money. Second pro tip. You have to accept the things you cannot change. Our life projects, the things we build, these grand pursuits that Wolf says, go do them, be actively engaged with them. These grand projects, every single one of them comes to an end. Many come to an end within our lifetimes. We raise children, the children die. We build institutions, those institutions die. We write programs, people use them for a while, and then the app is no longer used at all. All things must pass. And you just have to accept this, because our finitude is one of those things that we cannot change. To expect otherwise is a kind of metaphysical megalomania. Now, here is a place that I report to you from personal experience. My life thus far has had two really big projects. First, being a husband and father. And second, moving to Singapore long ago, founding or helping to found Yale and US College. Now that project is over. We were kicked out of that campus in May. Gone. Half of my life, one of those big life projects, gone. I don't say this to make you feel sorry for me. You shouldn't. I say this as an example of something I have simply come to accept. You must accept the things you cannot change, or they will just fuck you up. So, this is something I accept. You will find this too. Life projects pursued, worthwhile, meaningful in their own right, that nonetheless come to an end. Because all things come to an end. And even if it doesn't come to an end during life, do you know when it will come to an end anyways? In death. Because we will come to an end as well. Third pro tip. Trade. And trade up, not sideways. Here's what I mean. You will come across various instrumental goods in your life, things that are useful tools. The thing to do with them is not to hold on to them. It's to trade them. But not sideways, not always for other instrumental tools. Like the man who trades SGD for USD, for IDR, for Bitcoin, back to USD again. No. You trade them for the things that are ultimately valuable. The experiences, the projects, the friendships, the grand pursuits that make a life worth living in the first place. Trade up, not sideways. Finally, savor. Do you remember that enemy of pleasure, hedonic adaptation? It really sucks. This is a total buzzkill. There are various tools we can use to fight against the buzzkill. One of them is, of course, just going cold turkey from pleasures. Go without for a while, and then even the smallest pleasure will feel great. Okay, one tool. Another one is to enjoy the good things, to notice them, to savor them while they are with us. Do you know what my secret is? I'm always savoring. Do you know why I pause sometimes in lecture? Yeah, because I forgot what I was going to say. But also, I'm just enjoying being here with you. I'm savoring. And Jolly, this one's for you. It's the last Negroni I had. Noticing what is good, seeing that it is good, being thankful. These things keep us from adapting too quickly to the pleasures that we do have in life. A very simple, easy tool to take pleasure in the good is to just notice the good, to see it is there. So you too can do this. And here now is your secret. You're always savoring. You know what to do. Get a Strat. The electric guitar. Thank you. If I were king, we would cancel finals. Or better, we'd do oral exams where every single student would come to my office, we'd chat for 1 hour. Thank you, everyone. That's very sweet. Okay. I want to take you back to George Bailey. At the pivotal point in the film, he's given a gift. So he's considering taking his own life. A bit of magic happens, and he's able to see what the world would have been like without him. And he makes a choice. I want to live. He comes home. And all of a sudden, he sees life and the goods in his life with new eyes. He takes pleasure in the good that was already there. He was already married to this woman, already had these kids, already had all these friends. But they have this wonderful Christmas celebration. And he takes joy in the good that is there. I think that's the meaning of life. Pleasure in the good. George Bailey made the choice to find that pleasure in the good. Will you? Choice is yours. Cheers.